Welcome back to Well-Driven Nails. Jeremy and I recently sat down with Chuck Fultz, a member and elder of Trinity Presbyterian Church who works for Water Mission. Recently, he was deployed to Turkey to a disaster area. You'll learn more about that and his work with Water Mission. Well, Mr. Fultz, welcome to Well-Driven Nails. This is our first time having a guest on, and we're doing it electronically, and so we're working out the kinks as we go, but I think it's working, so praise the Lord for that. Chuck Fultz is an elder at Trinity Presbyterian Church. He is also, well, I'll let you tell us what you are at vocationally.
My day job, in other words.
Yes.
Yep, I've been blessed to be an elder here at Trinity for about, I think I'm on my 4th year. I don't know. Feels like some days it feels like forever. Some days it feels like I'm just starting out.
It's got to be more than 4 years.
Yeah, I think it probably is. My wife Caitlin and I have been married for going on 14 years, blessed with 4 kids, and because of that, and because of the Lord's blessing, I'm also blessed to work for a ministry called Water Mission. Water Mission is a Christian engineering ministry. World headquarters is in Charleston, South Carolina, though I get to work from home here in Spartanburg. And we have offices all over the world where most of the actual work is being done. We've got Water Mission has permanent country offices in 9 other countries outside the U.S. We work with our 2 primary objectives are to fight the global water crisis and to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ. Global water crisis is one of those issues facing the world that most people have never heard of. But I usually like to start out by just asking people to think about, when was the last time you got thirsty? What did you do? Most people don't even think about it because they've got a water bottle in hand. They go to their faucet, go to the refrigerator, pull out the Brita pitcher out of the fridge, something, and thirst is just not something is not a need that we think about very often. But for 2 billion people around the world, it's a huge problem. There are many people who don't have water. There are many people who do have water, and the water that they're drinking is making them sick and killing them in many cases, just because the source has been tainted and contaminated when they go to drink it. So I'm blessed to work with some very, very smart engineers who travel all over the world in rural communities, in disaster areas, and in refugee camps to find water sources and then make them safe and readily available for people to drink. And then along the way, as we're opening up the door, we use the doors that opens to tell people about the living water message of Jesus Christ as well. Last thing I'll say about myself is that I'm not one of those smart people. I work in marketing. So I get to tell people about the smart people and invite people in to join the work.
I was going to ask you that. You are not an engineer. That's not your training. Your training is in an entirely different direction. So what is your job title there at Water Mission?
So I'm the director of marketing, and I'm one of the team leads in the larger marketing communication department. That's a catch-all term for a lot of different kind of work that's going on. We help promote events. We raise public awareness. We handle all outgoing and a lot of internal communication for the ministry. So we could be doing on any given day, we could be doing anything from drafting emails, sending blasts out to get people engaged. We manage our website. We're working in digital acquisition right now, trying to get more people to know both about the global water crisis and the opportunities that exist for them to come alongside Water Mission in the work that we do. We're continually supporting our partnership and our programming teams to make sure that their work is excellent, clear, well communicated, and on brand. So that's a small taste of it. Honestly, one day to the next are very, very different in this line of work.
How big is Water Mission?
So I mentioned our headquarters is in Charleston. We've got staff all over the U.S. There's about 150 of us here in the States right now.
Full-time?
But full-time. We've got a few part-time people, but that's primarily full-time staff, yeah. And then outside the U.S., we have another 300 to 350. I'm not sure the exact number, but the majority of my colleagues are outside the U.S. And that's
Hmm.
because the people doing the actual work are based out of one of our 9 country offices. 95% of those staff are hired locally, so they're typically serving their own neighbors with the work that we do. And so we here in the U.S. like to say that's where the magic happens, and we're just trying to provide support and keep that work going as best we can.
I remember when you were going through some vocational changes a few years ago that you were very conscientious that you wanted to work for a Christian company or a Christian ministry. And you were coming out of a Christian environment. You wanted to stay in that world and go into it.
Yeah,
The marketing world in general can be a difficult world for a Christian to work in. And I know you were very
yeah,
conscientious about not wanting to work for a company that was going to be promoting promoting anything that was contrary to the gospel, contrary to our worldview, contrary to the ethics that the Bible teaches to us. And so, good thing you landed at Water Mission.
amen to that. Yeah, you're very kind. That is one of the great blessings I have. The work is hard. Nonprofit work can be very, very intense, and you never know what's coming. But it's good to know when I wake up every day, when I finish every night, no matter how hard it's been, that there's a purpose behind it. I'm not just flogging athletic shoes or trying to convince people to buy into something I don't believe in. It's a blessing to know I'm helping people, body and soul, to a large extent. That means a lot because if you work in marketing or designing the creative industries, you've got to pour your heart into making people believe, and that's hard to do. That's hard to do when your conscience isn't there.
Yeah.
I think Bud Light is learning that there's certain things that don't sell, even in conservative America, let alone the Christian world.
So do we have any DEI training going on there at Water Mission? So
This is a rabbit trail we could go down for sure.
one thing that I thought was really impressive is on the website it says that Charity Navigator, which is a charity rating system, has given Water Mission a 4-star rating for the last 15 years in a row, which is like only the top 1% of the charities that they rate actually achieve that type of rating. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah. Yeah, we've been very thankful for that recognition. Many people often ask, why didn't we get 5 stars?
Right.
We always have to clarify it's a 4-star scale, so that is
Okay.
and
Helps.
one of the things we gets repeated a lot around Water Mission are our company or our corporate values, our mission values: love, excellence, and integrity. And those are something we try to live out in all of our work and everything that we do. And it's something that we don't do it for the recognition, but Charity Navigator, they're a tough critic. So it's nice to have that confirmation that we're hitting at least a few of those things.
Yeah, and it's transparency is huge with Water Mission as well, which I think is nice because a lot of your charities out there, people are really not aware of their financials and don't realize that maybe only 5% of what they donate actually ends up going to the cause. And this, it seems pretty impressive with Water Mission.
Yeah, we get the vast majority of what's given to us and entrusted to our care goes straight out into safe water for people. So that's something that's very important to me. There's actually a lot of organizations in the water space who don't do any work at all. They just collect and raise money and then work with other people to do it. And that's not wrong per se. But I work for what's known as an implementing organization, which means we don't just raise money, we use it to actually go out and implement solutions. We
you guys
actually
are
make
hands
stuff
on.
and build stuff. Yeah. Yeah, and my passion has always been in my line of work. I want to bring people together, and I want to bridge the gap between the people who can help and people who need help. Although often that exchange is a lot more two-way than we often think. So it's nice because people give to Water Mission, and it's Water Mission that then takes that and helps people directly. So keeps things simple.
And then
like
on
you say,
top
keeps
of it,
things
you get
transparent.
to spread the gospel to these people that, in some cases, may have
Yeah.
not ever even heard it. You might be in some kind of
Yes.
remote place where the church is just not there, or maybe even the area is hostile
Yeah.
to the Christian faith.
Several of the countries we work in, particularly when disaster areas come, are openly hostile, are legally hostile to the Christian faith. And I work with some remarkable brothers and sisters who they wouldn't be there, they wouldn't be able to minister if we didn't have a necessary service that we were providing. And I've seen some of these people firsthand. They're out there with Safe Water Solutions, but they're building friendships, they're making connections, and they're talking about their faith in everything that they do. It's very, very natural. The way we share the gospel varies an awful lot wherever we go, but a lot of it's just driven by the passion and the heart that my fellow staff members have for Jesus and for sharing his message as well as aid in his name.
Amen.
Yeah.
Now, before we get into the recent trip that you took to one of those disaster areas, I want to go back.
Yep.
I want to go back and talk about clean water because, I mean, honestly, you wouldn't think that it was a problem today. I mean, maybe 100 years ago, maybe 70 years ago, something like that, where there wouldn't be any infrastructure and disease was waterborne disease is spread. And we just don't think that that's happening today, but that's just completely false.
Yeah, it is.
We live in a bit of a bubble.
We do live in a bit of a bubble. I mean, there are water issues even here in the States. Some of the recent news stories about Flint, Michigan come to mind. There have been issues a couple
years back. That's my hometown. That's where I'm from, Flint, Michigan. But the water was fine back in the 70s when I lived there. So, well, maybe, maybe it might explain a few things.
We all might remember we had a big, when the hurricane went through South Carolina a couple of years back. I think that was kind of a wake up. The water mission actually responded within its own state when that happened on a limited scale, because what you find is water systems are nowhere near as robust and as we tend to consider them. We take them for granted, but as soon as infrastructure is disrupted, water is kind of one of the most vulnerable things, because all it takes is for something that shouldn't be in the water to get in the water, and then the whole thing becomes not the source of life and health that's supposed to be, but it can become very, very dangerous very, very, very quickly.
It's often the case in like an emergency situation, like a hurricane blowing through. I think I remember Katrina, that many people will be stranded and they can't drink the water. It's very obviously polluted, and 4 days without water, and you're in dire straits. I mean, you're facing death very quickly without water. And so I remember pictures from Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans and just people not having access, and water had to be, airlifted in.
Right. So if you try to summarize, what we face to try to bring safe, clean water to people, it's really as diverse as geographic regions we're in. When people try to imagine, a lack of water, they think of deserts, and there's certainly places in South Central Africa, in East Africa, where we deal with situations like that. Water is just really hard to find. You have to dig really deep to get it up so that people can have it. But then you go to parts of Africa, other parts of Africa like northwest Kenya, plenty of water around, but the water is coming from such deep old sources that mineral contamination becomes an issue, and you have to have a whole new set of solutions. You can get the water, but now the question is, how do you filter it out and get it ready to drink? A whole new problem. Or you go to Ukraine. Ukraine has plenty of water, but a lot of the supply is Soviet era, is a relic from the Soviet era. So it's there's a lot of lead contamination. There's a lot of industrial pollutants in there that are very dangerous. And then, of course, they've been going through, they've been a war zone for the past 2 years. So, water gets knocked out very, very easily. There are hundreds and hundreds of reasons why people don't have water or don't have water that they can safely drink.
Right. So Water Mission is not only focused on disaster relief, but also on restoration of renewing old water sources to new water sources, and maybe even bringing new water sources where there were no water sources before.
Yeah, definitely. Back in and that's why we work in the areas we do. And as I mentioned at the top, rural communities, refugee camps, and disaster areas. Those are the three main areas we work. And in many of those cases, and that's why because we feel like with our approach to safe water delivery really serves those audiences best, and that's where we see the need is the greatest. Because typically those are the most underserved people, as far as safe water availability is concerned.
What are some of the areas that you're working in right now as far as crisis areas? I'm thinking, obviously there are refugees coming out of Ukraine heading into Poland and other places. Are you there working to get the refugees clean water?
Ukraine is a hard one to talk about because, it feels like every 3 months the nature of our response there has changed, just because the need is so rapidly shifting. Water mission's been in and around Ukraine within for the last 2 years. We were there within the first week when the crisis broke out. And so in those early days, we were not in Ukraine proper. We were in Poland and Romania primarily, and we were serving people who were basically fleeing from their homes and heading for the surrounding states there in Eastern Europe. At that point we were primary. Whenever we first go in, we stop, we look around, we listen, we try to make sure we know how we can serve best. It's very easy for a charity like us to just kind of rush in and start throwing our stuff at a problem, and we're always very intentional. We don't want to do that. Our primary need at that point was something not directly to safe water access, but related to it. We were doing a lot of hygiene and sanitation work, trying to make sure that people had not only water to drink in some of these displacement camps, but places to bathe, and the products they needed for personal care in these situations. Again, another thing we take for granted. But when the war is rolling down on your home, you grab what you can, and it lasts as long as it does, and then a lot of the basic needs start falling out. Now, since then we have pushed our work further and further into the country. There are some safe water. There's many cases where we've gone in and restored municipal water supplies days after missile strikes would have knocked them out. And one of the reasons that the Lord's blessed us to be able to respond so quickly is that we always seek out the churches whenever we go in. We always want to find the Lord's people and see where his body is. And what we found is that the body of Christ can often identify needs much faster than local, state, and federal governments can. And so they can say, hey, just down the road, a lot of people don't have water. We're like, great, help us get connected with who we need to. And so we always make sure to work within the legal framework and lawful submission to the civil magistrate when we go in, but very often it's the church that helps us get where we need to go quickly and effectively.
Maybe everybody understands this, but you don't take water places. You take the machinery, the infrastructure, whatever you want to call it, to make sure that they have a source of clean water.
That's a great question. That's a great distinction. No, we very, very, very rarely haul bottled water anywhere. That's extremely inefficient. It's extremely difficult. It's expensive. It's wasteful. It's just not what we like to do. There's a few cases where we'll do it, just because the need is immediate and we try to get it out there. But even in those cases, it's typically not anything we bring into countries. We typically find a water source, make sure it's safe, and then we'll equip water trucks or some other distribution system we have to. No, that's the reason that we have engineering in our little tagline, our elevator pitch. We go and engineer solutions. We find the water sources, we make them safe, and then we work on making sure distribution is ready and available for whoever needs it. Right. And that's true whether it's Ukraine, whether it's East Africa, whether it's the middle of Indonesia. That's always what we're looking to do.
Right. So the goal is to achieve a sustainable water resource for these people. Right.
Sustainability is a huge buzzword. We use it too. It means things to many different people.
Right.
The way I like to think about it just means longevity.
That's the way I like to think of it as well.
Exactly. We do not want to come in, do a bunch of fancy work, and 6 months later it all breaks down and goes away.
Right.
One of the things that I love to talk about water mission is not just the great engineering, but also the financial systems that we put in place. One of the things that first impressed me when I was being considered for the ministry was that we actually, that people don't realize this, but in most of our water systems, people actually pay for water access. And that makes some folks scratch their head. You're like, well, aren't you a charity? Aren't you giving this away for free? And we're like, yes, to a point, but we don't have the capacity to maintain every water system we ever put in.
Right.
Our goal is to be able to build something and then turn it over to community, turn it over to a municipality, turn it over to people who can then keep it running. Creates jobs. It gives local investment into the situation, and then when people pay for it, it means they appreciate it more, and there's also the wherewithal to make repairs and to expand when the need comes. And so that's our hope, is that what we do today will be there a year later, 5 years later, 10 years later. We hope that we can build something that lasts.
And it's not just about water you can drink.
No.
So you're very, I don't like the word, intentionality or you're very intentional about sharing the gospel in the communities where you're setting up infrastructure for clean water.
Yeah.
Now, this might be pivoting to talk about your recent, I think they call it a deployment.
Right.
And so you were on the ground in a disaster area, and so you were able to. That would have been your second deployment, or was it your first?
That's my first deployment to a disaster area. I've traveled into the field.
That's right.
And seen some of our community development work in rural areas. This was my first time in a disaster area.
Okay.
With Water Mission. Yeah.
So how does that side of it go down on the field? I mean, you're not setting up church services. You're not doing like that. Is it really is it personal contact with individuals in the community? And so you're telling them about clean water. You're also telling them about the living water of our Lord and Savior. So how does it happen?
Yeah, so we always talk about safe and living water. We're all about both. We talked about safe water. The living water, living water is what we view as even more important. The form that takes, well, frankly, our safe water solutions are incredibly diverse. We do all kinds of different things. Sometimes we're going to put in a media filtration system. Next place we're going to put in a reverse osmosis system. We're always going in to tailor our approach based upon the specific conditions and needs wherever we work. It's much the same with the living water side as well. In many cases, like I said, our first step is usually to find where is the local church. Once we find the local church, we try to engage with the leadership there, and if possible, we bring safe water solutions in or around church property, so that's not only serving their work and complementing it, but also drawing people to their doors in a very, 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 very real sense. We are very we don't go where we're not asked, and where we know where we don't have the support from local community to bring things on. So very often the local church is very important in gathering people from local community and forming a body that will provide oversight of the safe water solution. So that also makes them a perfect place to start to become a center for education and outreach as well. Because very often, just because you bring safe water to a community doesn't mean that people are going to use it or understand it or understand why they should use it compared to what they were doing before. And then there's a whole host of things that go along with it, like you should wash your hands, and you should be making sure you use a well-constructed latrine for personal needs. So very often we equip the church to kind of train people and become what we call wash educators, water, sanitation, and hygiene, wash educators for their local community. Sometimes we'll find that the local church is very, very weak and struggling. There could be men who are called, there could be men and church leaders who are seeking to minister to a community, but they're under equipped for the work that we do. So we will run training seminars for both for church leaders as well as for church members. And these topics could be anything from forgiveness, biblical instruction on grief, working to overcome trauma, particularly in a refugee setting. That's something that we do a lot. We've helped run marriage seminars to build up the family through the churches that we've worked with before. That would be kind of the large scale ministry that we do. But then there's also the personal side of it. There's just relationships built. We're in communities for at least 6 months before things are done. Our staff are there every day. They're talking to people. They're working alongside people. Some of them are Christian, many of them are not. And so along the way, we're having conversations, and we're telling people about the needs of their soul, in addition, while serving the needs of their body as well. It's not easy to summarize, and we spend a lot of time, particularly in my line of work, trying to wrap our heads around how do we measure and report on the impact of this, because we want to, a lot of our supporters and our partners here in the U.S. and other parts of the world who believe in our work, they want to know that souls are being blessed as well as bodies. So we spend a lot, but you can calculate how many gallons of water you're producing, the impact you have. Sometimes you can see it right away. Sometimes we're planting seeds that are long down the road, that'll be reaped long down the road.
You don't have decision cards that people turn in when they make a profession of faith?
Not that I've heard.
Okay.
Like I said, though, every
you need those stats.
Every one of the offices do things a little differently. That may be out there. Yeah. If so, I need to get a hold of those things.
The seeker-sensitive model of mission. It sounds like it's a lot more intense than what we really think about on the surface. The ministry is really in depth there with going into the churches and dealing with people on those levels. That's great.
There was a story I think of from Ukraine. It was an older woman in her 60s who had to flee her home in Ukraine, and she ended up at a displacement camp where one of our solutions was in place, and she just said she couldn't. She told one of our contractors working there she couldn't believe that people would come from all across the world, the other side of the world, to come help her. And she said, she said, the God that you serve shall be my God as well, because of the love you've shown. There was a woman in Tanzania at a refugee camp. She was a Burundian refugee after the flee. She fled with her family from the civil war. She was so angry with the insurgents who had driven her out of her home that she told all of her children to go out and join a counterinsurgency and kill as many of them as they could. And after she went through one of our trauma healing programs, she repented of that. She said, "I'm going to call my children home. They can't live with this bitterness that the Lord has taken away from me. I want them to know this too." Those are the stories we love to hear most and share as much as we can. That's some of the best part of my work.
That's great.
Let's come back to talk about your deployment to Turkey. Why were you deployed there? What was going on? And just give some of the background there.
Yeah. Well, I was deployed there because I'm a very blessed man, and I got a wonderful opportunity. Typically when Water Mission deploys a disaster response team, it's primarily made up of engineers and community developers, the kind of people who can not only go in and engineer solutions, but also can go in and make connections quickly and start engaging with people and finding the resources and finding both the resources that we need and the areas where we can best serve. However, in recent years, we've also been intentionally deploying a communication specialist with the team. So typically that's been our creative director or our media manager. They're both experienced videographers and photographers, and they'll head out and they'll just start capturing both the need, the solutions, and the impact that's being made. Those are primarily what we want to capture. We try to move very, very fast. Obviously, on the engineering and programming side, they're wanting to try to bring relief as soon as possible. On our side, we're a little more jaded and cynical. We're trying to catch the news cycle. We're trying, while people are thinking about something that's happened, a disaster has happened. That's the time we want to really engage them and give them opportunities to help. So we're trying to get resources and content out of a disaster as fast as we can. So for history lesson for anybody who's listening who may have may not have thought about this because it has been out of the news for a while. Back in early February, two very, very serious earthquakes hit southern Turkey within just a few hours of each other. There was a severe earthquake and then an aftershock that was almost just as bad, and they hit very close to each other, and they hit just a few hours apart, and it was devastating to a part of the world, probably a part of the world with some of the richest history of any place you could imagine. So but this past April, I was deployed as, I believe, the fourth communications member who'd been out there. We typically rotate people out on 2 to 3 weeks just because it's intense when you're in disaster areas. So we'll rotate out US and other global staff there. So I was able to join a team who was already of other staff members who are already in place to go and support the work. I was traveling with a camera. My primary objective was to do what I said before and try to just capture the sights, the sounds, and the faces of the impact. Other people had been there before. They'd got the expected pictures of destroyed buildings and damaged infrastructure. I was going to try to go and actually talk to the people whose lives had been impacted both by the earthquake and the solutions that we brought in. Along the way, what I realized is when you're on a disaster response team with Water Mission, the priority is the water to get it flowing. So there were whole days where I showed up with my camera, I had my script, I had my shot list, I was ready to capture some great footage, and I had to just lay it aside, leave it in there, and do my best over signal, talking to an engineer, trying to get water systems back up where we'd run it, where there were issues or there were concerns, try to get them back up. So I had to get my hands dirty a lot in the midst of that.
We're talking, this happened in February, correct? February of this year, the earthquakes happened in southern Turkey, northern Syria.
Yes,
and
exactly.
But Turkey, I believe Turkey was the hardest hit, certainly the most casualties. We're talking in the tens of thousands of people lost their lives in those two earthquakes. And you talk about the richness of the history. You're one of the people that got me to study some of the history around this area. Actually, it'd be further into the Mediterranean. You got me on that, what was it? The history of Malta, which is fascinating, interesting history. But you have studied this before you ever went there. You had studied this history in this area.
Yeah.
And it's been a fascination of yours, and so you got to go on the ground of this place that had been described to you in books, and so that must have been thrilling to you personally. I mean, yes, you're going into a disaster area, and it's filled with grief, but nonetheless, you're laying eyes on a region that you had studied and known and loved.
Oh boy, how much time do we have?
Yeah.
Exactly. Every Christian who's read the New Testament has studied Turkish history.
That's right.
Because pretty much everything that's written about the spread of the church from once the church leaves Jerusalem and heads out, most of it's talking about places that are in modern day Turkey. So I was in the historical city of Antioch for much of my trip. But Ephesus and many of the other cities that received the epistles were all in what was known as Asia Minor at the time, and known as Turkey today. The history of the early church is a history of that part of the world. That's really only the beginning. I visited just a small museum there, and kind of saw a taste of things even further back into history. And it's just amazing because of where Turkey is situated. It's right there. It's the Straits of the Bosphorus, right, go right through the middle of the country. Well, not the middle, but right through one of the most important parts. And the ancient city of Constantinople, Istanbul, as it known today, sits right there, as it connecting the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea to the Mediterranean. So both sea travel as well as land travel have used that connection to funnel millions of people from Asia to Europe and vice versa. So it's incredibly rich, everything that's happened there. My own personal studies have been not only in early Christian history there, but also particularly on the history of the Ottoman Empire, and their growth in the region and their influence over that portion of Asia and Europe, and the foundational effect they had on world history through that period. And then I was, and then my interpreter was a college student from Istanbul, and he, like many modern Turks, is he's extremely passionate and patriotic about the history of his country from World War One on. Many people forget that the Ottoman Empire lasted for over 1,000 years and only ended in the 20th century with World War One. It's an amazingly long-lived empire. And so after that was a period of incredible change, and a lot of really strong-willed personalities that shaped the remains of the empire and a lot of geographic heritage into a modern nation. So a lot of people, when they think of Turkey, they think of it as they think of Iraq, they think of news footage from Iraq, Iran, Lebanon. Turkey is not like any of those things. It's incredibly fertile. It's incredibly sophisticated. It's very, very European in most cases that you follow. The country is vastly predominantly Muslim, but it's not what you think. It actually feels a lot like visiting a modern European city or a modern American city. Other than the fact that people are speaking Turkish, they dress they dress very familiar to what you'd see walking down American City. They like to go out to eat. They like to drink. They like to hang out at bars and go to parties. It feels very much like America in many ways. So it's a fascinating juxtaposition of the modern and the ancient, the European and the Asian, the new, the old. It all just kind of mingles when you go to Turkey.
It's a member of NATO, right?
It is. Yep.
And so very deeply connected politically to Europe, and yet very deeply connected to I would imagine, to the Middle East politically as well. It's in this limbo area.
We just recently went through Turkey just went through a very contentious presidential election, and it's funny, we have our issues and our preoccupations, here in U.S. elections, and they're very different in Turkey. There's very much a sense of when Turkey was established, when the modern Turkish state was established by Mustafa Kemal Ataturk back following World War One. He was very determined that we will acknowledge our heritage, but we will join the rest of the Western world. We will be part of the community of nations, and he worked very hard for that. Matter of fact, to this day he is honored and revered. He's one of the most important men of the country. His face is everywhere. His name is on everything. You can't go anywhere without running into Ataturk. However, so he was very much that we're going to be a modern secular democracy, and that's the way he shaped the Turkish state. However, Islam is much older, and its roots run very deep throughout the population of 90 million people throughout the country. So one of the issues at hand that I learned a lot about just driving around with my interpreter and meeting with our local contractors is that there's a sense should Turkey continue to be a modern Western style secular democracy like it is, or should it take its place as it has done before as the leader of the Muslim world again? There's a hot debate about which way the future of Turkey should go, and the current president President Erdogan has a lot of his support comes from his development and his close ties with the more traditional conservative Muslim community within Turkey. There is, in a very real sense, a desire to bring back a lot of the power and influence of the Ottoman Empire to the modern state of Turkey. And there's not just within Turkey, but other nations around it are looking to Turkey for leadership in the Middle East and in the Muslim world in particular. We had some long car drives. I had a lot of really fascinating conversations about the past and the present and the future of Turkey driving around, in case you can't tell.
Right. Well, and with the past rich Christian history in the early church in the Byzantine Empire and this kind of thing, what is the Christian church like there now?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked. It's very, very small. So like I said, about 80 to 90 million people in Turkey today, about 10,000 of which are Christians, based on what I was told. So very, very, very small minority. In most cases, there's not a real sense of persecution as we think about it, because again, that secular democracy just there's a there's many places where you go where it feels like a post-Muslim country, much as America is a post-Christian country these days, where people just don't really make a big deal about it. They're Christian in this, they're Muslim in the same casual way that many Americans claim to be Christian, Easter and Christmas, and that's about it. So in some ways that makes it friend, in some ways that makes it an easier place to be a Christian, but it's still very, very isolating, and it can still be very, very dangerous depending on where you go, because not all the country's the same. And there's places where Islam is a lot stronger, and people take their commitment to that much, much more seriously. Churches are typically very, very small. They're very, very isolating. It's not an easy place to get married if you're looking for a Christian spouse, just because they're so few, and because brothers and sisters are so few and far between. One of the things I was blessed to do there was, once we were there I was there over two Lord's days. The first one we were out looking at community for a potential safe water solution, but the second we decided let's go to church, and so we found a tiny little Protestant church just a few blocks over from our hotel in our hotel, and we got to worship with the small body believers there. Um, I can't tell you what was preached because it was all in Turkish. And I recognized that they said the word Isa, which is Jesus in Turkish, enough times to feel like it was probably evangelical, but I didn't get anything else out of that. Other than, the general order of worship felt very much like a modern American Baptist church. Some hymns, lots of prayer, lengthy sermon. The sweetest part for me was afterwards we had a fellowship meal, and it's funny, it felt just like a potluck at Trinity. One of the sisters in the church had volunteered to prep a meal for everybody that day. We all sat around. They put us at one table and sent all the people who spoke English over to our table so we could actually fellowship and talk for a little bit. And it felt like home. It felt like
great.
home, on the other side of the planet.
But instead of a macaroni pie, you had some pita and lamb.
We had rice and a vegetable stew poured over it. So it was hearty and it was good. It's definitely not like anything I'd had here in the States. Yeah, I did have pita and lamb. No pita. I don't actually know what they call their bread. It's kind of like a long flat bread. It's more like an Indian naan.
Yeah.
Anything I'd seen. Ate plenty of lamb while I was there.
Oh yeah.
You heard that you were going to Turkey at when? So the earthquakes were in February. You went when?
April.
April.
Around early mid-April, yeah.
Okay. And how did your family take that news? I mean, I'm just trying to think through my mindset that I would initially be very fearful that this is a lot of travel. I mean, even the travel is enough to make me fearful, but going into a disaster area and just the unknowns of that, and going into a country that has different customs and different language.
Yeah.
I mean, all of that is difficult. But then you're leaving your wife and children back here to carry on. And so what was the sense of all this in your own head and maybe in your family?
Yeah, good question. It was a lot quieter when I went. The early days of disaster are usually most chaotic for obvious reasons. So everything, since we were a couple of months out from the early days, things had kind of stabilized. And that was actually the most striking thing about being there, was just how, I mean, whole city's just devastated. And then even the buildings that were still standing, you think they look okay. You go up and you realize they're all empty because they're unsound and unsafe to go in. And yet in the midst of it, people have kind of resumed something like normal life. And it's so jarring to see, but life has to go on. So families have to be fed, and kids have to be educated, and folks have to, buy what's necessary. And so some sort of normalcy had returned to a lot of things, which meant it was a lot quieter. I also, I didn't have a lot of concerns myself because I've seen a lot of disaster responses from this side, and I know just how careful Water Mission is before we send staff in. There's a risk to this, and none of us go out thinking that it's going to be a walk in the park. But there's a lot of assessment that's done just to make sure that our staff who come in will be as safe and secure and welcomed as we possibly can be. The fact that we're going in as to provide a basic service opens a lot of doors and provides a certain level of protection. that helps a lot in these situations. There's a lot of, my wife was nervous but excited. My kids were just excited. That was kind of the response on the home front. And, I'm glad I wasn't there by myself because there's no English spoken. Cultures, in spite of a lot of similarities, the differences are very, very real as well. But thankfully, I was there with a lot of experienced staff members who they added a lot to the training I'd prepared, that had prepared me before I went, which just kind of helped me see my way through a disaster response in general, as well as this one in particular. I'm very, very thankful for the brothers and sisters I served alongside because they had laid a lot of the groundwork that made it possible for a new guy like me to come in and learn.
Yeah, whether you realize it or not, there was still a lot of danger there even after,
Oh yeah.
right?
Yeah, and I talked to colleagues. I talked to colleagues who they got in some hairy situations. It was something I was prepared for, something I was prepared for if it came. Nothing too crazy happened for me, which I'm
Right.
thankful for, but that was a real possibility.
Well, and also just aftershocks. I know from growing up in California that
Hmm.
you can be in a big earthquake and you think that it's over, and you could have aftershocks for weeks. You know, something come out of the blue a month later. Yeah.
I was literally on a call. I was literally on a check-in call with one of our colleagues over there a few months before I went, and he's like, "Okay, hang on, there's an aftershock," and everything's just rumbling and shaking around him. And a few minutes later, he's like, "I'm still here. I guess we'll keep talking." But yeah, that was just a reminder that it was still a very unstable part of the world to be in.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Again, take us back to that time. Uh, You were probably, I mean, how long were your days? What did you see? Just tell us about some of that experience. I imagine they were long days, they were difficult days, and you saw a lot of people trying. You said there was a return to normalcy, but I imagine there were still a lot of people that were struggling and
Yeah.
attempts to move on, but maybe not knowing how. And so, just
No.
take us into one of the days that you were there, and describe what you saw.
Yeah. So day started. I was usually up and down to breakfast around 7 a.m. We'd eat at our hotel,
Hmm.
and then we'd just have a quick meeting and prayer before we set out for the day. We had a fleet of about four rental cars, and we typically divide into at least two, sometimes three teams who'd be heading to the communities we were serving. Our primary projects were in the city of Kahramanmaraş. My Turkish is slipping since I've been back. Kahramanmaraş to the north, and then Antakya, which is what Antioch is called today, region of Antakya, heading down south towards the Syrian border. And that's where, so on any given day, we'd have to make a choice. Are we going north or are we going south? Because it was going to be 1.5 to 2 hour drive either way. Because we were serving both areas, and because there was no safe place to be, to stay in those places. We were kind of in an unaffected area, roughly in the middle. Um, so we would then head out, and we'd have some driving to do before we got there. And then during the days, we'd be visiting. I would typically tag along with some of the engineers who are going to inspect or finish installing safe water installations that we put up. And so we'd get there. I'd take a few shots of the installation, document the engineer, document the technical stuff for a little bit, and then start walking around with our interpreter to try to talk to some people, and get a feel for what life was like in these communities. It's really beautiful. There's a lot of ingrained etiquette in Turkey, and as well as throughout much of the Middle East. There's tremendous love for community, for guests, for hospitality, and even if people have lost everything, they're very open. Many of them are, once the initial shock of the disaster worn off, they were very, very open to talking, and very, very hospitable. I can't tell you how much tea I drank because that's a staple of Turkish hospitality.
Yeah.
Come on in, kick your shoes off at the door, and then here's a cup of tea. And so drink it. It's like the British, except the tea is way better. So got to drink that everywhere we went, and then just starting to talk to people about what their lives are like. one of the reasons that Water Mission serves in disaster areas, refugee camps, and rural communities is because that's where people are. That's where the need is greatest. That's where people are underserved, as we say in the nonprofit world. Because I mean, think about what would happen if an earthquake hit Spartanburg tomorrow. Many of us who could, if it was as bad as Turkey, many of us just say, all right, that's it, I'm out of here. I'm going to go live with family, I'm going to live with friends, I'm going to find myself a hotel out of the midst of this. And that's what most people did. As soon as they possibly could, they drove, they walked, they flew, they got out of the disaster areas if they had the means to do it. So the people who were still there by the time I was there, by and large, were the folks who didn't have any other option but to remain living in tents and other temporary shelters within in many cases, the shadows of their destroyed homes, or amidst their rubble. Those are the people that we were talking to. And so, I mean, there was one day we were at a displacement camp in Marash, and my interpreter and I were out there. There was a distribution point where the safe water was, and we've been talking to people and asked questions, and we could tell the sky was about ready to open up. And so thankfully, this very gracious lady came out. We started talking to her, and she looked up at the sky and said we need to come with her. So she ended up inviting us into the tent with she and her family, where we got to do an interview, and we literally walked in just before the sky opened up. And she got to tell us about her apartment building was just behind where the displacement camp was set up. And we got to talk to her about what it was like when the quake hit and what her life has been like since then, which is very, very hard because she doesn't have any options. It's not just you don't have a place to live anymore. It usually means your livelihood, your work, everything that, your community, everything that kind of filled your life is just gone now. And everything just kind of shrinks down to the tent or the tent community that you're in, because very often you don't have the resources for anything else. So it's, there's another one where I got to be at a displacement camp. This one is what we call an unofficial camp, which means there's no local authority or government has set or organization set this up. It's just people who didn't have anywhere else to go, so they started grabbing tents and setting them up. And so some other NGOs had set up in the area and were providing 2 meals daily. They were doing a morning meal, which primarily just children eating, because I was there during Ramadan, so most of the adults were fasting during the day. And then they also serve an evening meal along with something to take home for breakfast. You mean
the kids don't have to fast during Ramadan?
At least not in this region, no. Okay. So that's more for adults.
I don't know the rules.
Islam is not covenantal.
Okay.
Ramadan's modern Ramadan is very interesting because much of the country, particularly in the cities, they don't fast. They don't really do any of what we traditionally associate it. They treat it more like a Christmas holiday, modern secular Christmas holiday celebration. It's a time to throw parties and give gifts and things like that. Out in the region, out in Marash, the community their beliefs are much more conservative. So you wouldn't see the men much during the day because they were off fasting and praying. Right. But we'd see a lot of the mothers with their children coming out to collect food for their families.
I think Jeremy's been fasting because if you hear his stomach growling,
roaring,
it's the loudest stomach growls I've ever heard.
It's annoying.
What is going on over there?
Ramadan's over, brother, and you don't have to
have to fast anymore.
Did you skip lunch or something?
I did. I ate breakfast, but okay. I haven't had anything else all day.
Man. Anyway, that the idea of a secular, just that whole idea of a secular Muslim country is hard to conceive of. I mean, we know firsthand what a secular Christian country looks like. And all of us are thoroughly disgusted by it, right? I mean, it's what does Santa Claus have to do with anything? But it's hard for us to conceive of a secular Muslim country.
It's so strange. There were days, there were periods where like, I think some of these people could use a little more Islam than they have right now, because all they're doing is just absorbing they're just absorbing Western secular humanism, and you can just tell it by the way they dress, the way they spoke, what their priorities were, and it's like, man. And then I'd go meet people who are very strongly Muslim. It's like, oh yeah, that's no better. Right. But it's such a strange contrast. It's so bizarre to be sitting there, and and everyone around you is chain smoking, everyone around you is drinking, and then all of a sudden you hear the call to prayer go out, which happened 3 times a day everywhere I was.
It sounds like a family reunion.
Cry, go out for the minarets from all the mosques.
How do they respond to the call to prayer?
I never saw anybody respond in the least.
Yeah.
And I asked one of our Turkish contractors about that. He said, well, anyone who's responding to that, they're in their houses, they're praying, they're kneeling, or making ablution in private right now. The people who are walking around, they don't care. Islam is just a name they drop at this point.
So it's a lot like Islam here in the U.S. So
some ways,
we see a lot of that here too.
Yeah. I can't tell if that's better or worse, quite honestly. I mean, going from Islam to Western humanism, that's just not much of an improvement.
Right.
Yeah, but
yeah,
you're right. Now he's having a heart attack. So, Jeremy,
I've seen this a few times. I thought Jeremy was laughing at something I said. So I was taking
no, he's having a heart attack. Don't bother him.
You got to eat something to have a heart attack.
Okay. Back to Western humanism and Islam. I mean, it's a good question of where would the gospel be more effective, in a secular Muslim environment, in a Western humanism, or in a more strict sect of Islam.
Yeah, I know.
Are there any remnants of first century Christianity? Or has that all been destroyed in war and immigration and earthquakes? I mean, I think it would be speculative if they found a site anyway, but is there any speculative sites of like first century Christianity?
None that I saw. We were about an hour and a half. Where we stayed was about it was just a few hours from Tarsus, where Saul of Tarsus, Paul was from.
Mm-hmm.
I don't, a couple other team members had traveled out there to view to see what remained. I did not go, so I didn't see anything myself. There's plenty, it's hard to give a sense because Turkey is so big.
Mm-hmm.
When you're in the U.S., you just kind of, it's easy to think everything else is just easy to think in very broad terms of these places. It's incredibly diverse. There are remnants in Izmir of some early Christian churches because that was historically the city of Ephesus, but there's not a lot because Izmir was also the site of a major battle following World War One, as the Turks drove the Greeks out of Anatolia to retake modern Turkey. So there's just layer upon layer upon layer. So really, the remnants I saw of first century Christianity were basically just a few Christians that I met.
Yeah.
I think the most striking one was an Eastern Orthodox church where one of our projects was. It was south of Antakya, and their church building was on this beautiful little hill overlooking the surrounding city. The building was severely damaged in the earthquake, so it was shut up and was not in use. And rather than try to rebuild it, the pastor, the priest there and his church, they decided to use their property as a community center. So they had a bunch of tents set up. They didn't have anyone living there, but there were thousands of people. There were about 2,000 people living in tents nearby. And so twice a day, once again, they were providing meals out of the community center, in addition to safe drinking water, which was in very, very short supply in the surrounding area. So that was, our work there was to make sure that safe water was available for anyone to come. They typically come and bring bottles of water to fill up while they were waiting in lines for the food that was being prepared. They had I got to meet with the head chef at the kitchen was a member of the church. He previously owned a restaurant that was destroyed, and so he was just volunteering his time full time to cook some really amazing food in a tent for everybody around. And what they found is they started with just a few hundred people, but the food was so good that just more and more people kept coming in. And then on the weekends, they'd give their head chef a break, and restaurants from the surrounding area would send their whole kitchen staff. I was there with a camera with about 20 people in this tiny little tent cooking a meal, trying not to get run over as they were prepping for dinner that they were passing out. And they were all wearing the livery from the restaurant where they were, for my Scandaroon, where they were originally located the rest of the week. And they just said, we want to come down and help. And so they got engaged with this church. The priest was a remarkable man. He spoke zero English, but the moment you met him, he'd shake your hand, look straight in the eye, and you could tell straight into his eyes. You could tell he cared about you and everyone around there. We spent a very awkward day. There was a problem with the chlorine dosing in the safe water solution that we had there. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to talk about this. But we run into issues too. And it was just me and the interpreter showed up one day, and the safe water system wasn't working the way it was supposed to. So we ended up spending the whole day and finally got it back, at least a temporary fix done by the end of the day. And the priest was riding us the whole time because he's like, people count on this stuff. You guys have got to get this working. And so that's one of those days where I didn't use the camera much. But at the end of the day, it was kind of worth it because the interpreter and we walked just behind the church property. There's an orange grove, and there's fresh oranges that were just falling off the tree. And so we ended up sitting and relaxing for a few minutes, just eating fresh oranges straight off the trees right behind this church property. And every time we left, because we were there 2 other times during our stay, we were like, it was amazing the sense of peace that just had reigned over this place. Now, I'm a Reformed Presbyterian. I have a lot of differences with Eastern Orthodox Christianity. And yet it was good to see even that church being the church to their own community and to the people around them and welcoming people in. We ended up being there around Easter, and it was, I couldn't think of a better place to be over Easter if I couldn't be in my own church. Was just seeing another corner of God's church, blessing people in His name and in the Lord's name where they were.
Wonderful.
Oh yeah.
I'm rambling on. Y'all are very good to listen here.
No, that's great.
It is fascinating. A wonderful opportunity. It's just mind-boggling opportunity.
It is.
And you'll likely, by God's grace, have opportunity to go elsewhere.
Hope so.
Do you have any plans for travel in the future? Maybe not to a disaster area. You can't plan that, but do you have plans to go somewhere else in the world?
I hope I get the opportunity again. No definite plans right now.
Okay.
So, but definitely potential for it.
What did you bring back from Turkey? You had to bring back something.
I brought back a few things. First of all, while I was there, I did eat Turkish delight. I had it before, and it was terrible, and it made me wonder why Lewis sought to forever immortalize that particular candy in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. But when you get it in Turkey, it actually tastes a lot better. It's actually pretty good. It's like a giant jelly bean or something like that. It's pretty tasty.
Rare. Okay.
Did not bring any of that back. I got some Turkish jewelry for my wife. I brought back some seeds from that orange grove that we visited in, that we'd ended that day in. In addition to oranges, there were also something called, I don't remember their Turkish names, but literally translated, they mean New World. Here in the U.S., I found out we call them loquats or Japanese plums, and they're about that big. They're about an inch and a half across. They're yellow in color, and they taste like a combination of an orange and a pear. And so they're absolutely delicious. So I brought back some of the seeds from that are growing in my backyard right now. And then finally,
I think you broke the rules for coming into the country. You can't bring agricultural products. There's signs all over the place when you come in from out of the country, Chuck. So.
I thought about that. We may have to cut this out, or
that's right.
Airport immigration might be getting on my case.
You enjoy that forbidden fruit that you eat.
I knew that living in California, we weren't allowed to bring fruit from other states into the state, but that was had to do with fruit flies.
Okay.
Yeah.
There we go.
The Mediterranean fruit fly outbreak.
Yes. Disaster.
So that was kind of sketchy. And then finally, I brought back soccer jerseys for all my kids.
Oh, cool.
Galatasaray is the big famous Turkish soccer club, big football club there. Their popularity rivals or exceeds that of the New York Yankees here in the States. And so I drove my interpreter crazy one evening. He helped me track down a fan store, and I was able to track down jerseys for my kids. they were the only kids at soccer practice wearing Turkish team colors. So.
But they're into that though. They like the World Cup and stuff like that.
They
right?
do, yeah, they do. They all play soccer. So,
Yeah.
and then it was very interesting. They're the Galatasaray. So Galata is the nearby city to Istanbul. Saray means palace. Galata Palace, and then their mascot is the lion, or the Aslans in Turkish. So there were a lot of connections there that they thought were cool.
Oh yeah.
Well, what else? Anything else?
I can't think of that. We covered a lot right there.
That was good.
That was good.
Chuck, that was excellent. Really,
Thank you.
really helpful, really encouraging stuff.
As the first guest.
It's fun to do a debrief.
So, yeah, we're not, it's going to be hard to top the
That's
first
right.
guest.
That's right.
It'll be downhill from here.
You're too kind.
No, it was very good.
Kind.
Very good. I'm thankful that the Lord has given you this work to do. Honestly.
My wife can tell you that I've not traveled internationally a whole lot. And whenever my wife and I dream about and think about where we want to go, I'm always thinking like, I don't want to go to the touristy places. I don't want to go where they send everybody. I want to go and see what it's really like. And so the Lord took me at my word with, when you head in a disaster area, you're seeing there's no facade, there's no show.
Yeah.
That's all been stripped away. So he took me at my word, and I'm really, really thankful for it. It's the amazing thing about international travel is when you meet people, once you get over the different food and the people speaking a language you don't understand, you see that their priorities, their preferences, their fears, their hopes, their needs, and their opportunities are really just the same everywhere. God's image is evident. The ravages of sin are clear. The blessing of the gospel is the same wherever you go. So it's not just seeing that. It's not just learning about how people are different. It's seeing people who are just like me, all over the place. That I think that was the greatest blessing for me to do that. Just to see how people make it work in another part of the world for a little bit.
The church Catholic in the right sense of the word.
Right.
Yeah, I could talk a lot about that little church and just the experience of what it meant to be just another Christian among Christians, and have all the other differences just kind of fall away for a bit of time as we all realize we worship the same Savior.
Yeah.
His salvation is not American. It's not American or Turkish. It transcends all those things.
Are you aware of any Reformed works in Turkey?
Not that I've heard of.
Yeah, I'm
Protestant, yes. Protestant, yes, but honestly, I don't know if they'd even have the. I don't know if anyone I spoke to would have even been familiar with the term or had it. The more I got to know, there might have been, maybe I would have, if I'd perused some books and gotten some translations, maybe we would have seen some things fall in. I suspect there would have been Reformed books on the shelf that had been translated, but I don't know if there would have been a sense of we're Catholic, we're Orthodox, we're Protestant, we're Reformed over here. I don't know if that would have been a category.
Holiness of God has to be translated into Turkish.
Yeah,
that'd probably be one of the. It's, what other books will we see on a Reformed Turkish shelf?
It was fascinating. There were at the church I visited, the music director and his wife, who's heavily involved in ministry. They were from Mexico, so they're long-term Protestant missionaries from Mexico in Turkey.
Wow.
Which I had to repent of some American arrogance there because I always just presume it's American missionaries and that's it. Nope. Ran into Mexican missionaries in Turkey. So praise God.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
It is.
It'll be the Turkish missionaries coming to America soon.
May well be.
I wouldn't have been being over there. I wouldn't have been able to get the thought out of my head that I'm possibly walking in some of the places where the apostles John and Paul walked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, particularly when you see the Mediterranean Sea, the bright blue Mediterranean Sea, and you think about all the battles that have been fought, all the trade that has happened, all the Bibles shipped across it, and all the missionary journeys across that. I got to go stand right on the shore and look out across the Mediterranean at one point.
Did you go up to the Black Sea? You didn't get that far north.
No, we were nowhere. The furthest north I was just the Istanbul airport where I made my connection.
Okay.
But yeah, I didn't get to see anything in the north of the country. I'd love to take the family back. as long as you stay in we'd probably stick a little more of the touristy areas for safety. But
Sure.
even then, there's a ton of world history to study within the country, and and Turkey is very easy to, you can get a visa online instantly. Turkish customs are some of the friendliest customs people I've ever seen. I had more trouble in New Jersey, getting back into the United States in New Jersey, than I did getting through customs in Istanbul. So it's not a hard place to visit.
Because of those seeds you harvested and brought back.
I know. Oh, man.
All right. Well, that's it. That's a wrap, as they say.
Yeah, that's some good tape right there. Use it wisely.
Yeah, it's still recording. I can see.
And hopefully this time next year we'll be loquats.
Yeah. Yes,
we want some of my contraband.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to implicate myself in a international crime.
Hey, if it tastes like an orange and a pear mix, I'm in.
I'm in.
Yeah. They apparently grow down Charleston a lot, but people just kind of walk over them. Nobody knows what they are. But I've heard I was talking to some colleagues who live down there and say, "Oh yeah, we got those all over the place."
Huh.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and I had asked you before if they were related to the kumquat, because I remember we used to eat those when I was a kid. We had a kumquat tree in the neighbor's yard. Half of it hang over in ours. So.
It's an actual fruit, the kumquat.
It's an actual fruit.
Yeah, I call my kids that, but I've never had the fruit.
They're small. They're they actually look like an oversized grape.
Huh.
But it's like a orange type peel
skin that's on them.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
And it was great to hear more about your job. I didn't know it was that that intense. That was really cool.
Yeah.
That's the last thing I'll say. One more thing about that. Yeah. When in my previous job as a web designer, and people will be like, "Oh, okay," because nobody knows what that is or how that's done or what to ask. So if I say marketing now, they still don't know what that means. But I get to now talk about Turkey, and I get to talk about our work in Peru, and I get to talk about engineering safe water solutions. And so I finally have something interesting to tell people when they ask me what I do.
Right.
Oh, that's very true.
Yeah, well, it answered a lot of the questions that I'm sitting there thinking, why would you send a marketing guy into a disaster area? But you answered that question. So
good.
Yeah,
I did get some photos and some decent footage as well. I'm not the world's greatest at either point, but I was able to do that.
Well, the documentation for any ministry is so important, so that you can, so that you can go back and you can say, "This is good work. Will you support this work?"
Right.
It's.
Oh, that's something we should have mentioned. Should have mentioned the website and the.
We still can.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do we find out more about Water Mission?
Go to watermission.org.
If you'd like to learn more about the global water crisis, the work of Water Mission, or how you can help, visit watermission.org. That's watermission.org.
There we have it.
Beautiful.